Good evening. I'll call to order the August 8th City of Arvada City Council Workshop. And Kristen Rush, if you'll do a roll call.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Jones.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Mormon.
Here.
Councilmember Simpson.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
All present and accounted for. We have a couple workshops. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's my pleasure to introduce City Engineer Jacqueline Rhodes, who will get us started on the quarterly bond project update.
Very good. Good evening.
We're going to go through our usual agenda. We have both of our project managers speaking on both projects today. So I'll introduce Alicia Cope and Britton Thomas. And you'll notice we have other team members here in the audience ready to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much.
Let's start with Ralston Road.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Alicia Cope, as Jacqueline said, and I'm going to, if you could go to the next slide. Is it me or? Oh, thank you. Thanks. So here are the two. The workshop agenda will cover right-of-way, construction phasing, budget, schedule, community outreach, and challenges and risks for both the Ralston Road Bond Project and the West 72nd Avenue project. Next slide. I'm going to head off or start with the Ralston Road Phase 2 project, which I'm the PM for. And here's a graphic and also a pie chart that kind of describes exactly what's going on with the right-of-way acquisition. There were 49 parcels that were privately owned that we had to acquire right-of-way from, and of those, 46 have been closed and recorded. One is still outstanding because of paperwork, so that's in the works. And then there are two that were subject to eminent domain. 7709 Ralston Road, that went to hearing already, and there will be another hearing to decide how much we will be owing the property owners for their legal fees and their expert witnesses. And then 7709, we're hoping that we might be able to settle with them out of court. So
You mean 9110?
I'm sorry, the hearing this month should be for 7709.
Oh, okay.
The text is incorrect, I apologize. Next slide. Here's an overview of what the initial budget numbers were for the different tasks and what we are expecting the costs to be. There is a bit of an increase, and that's due to certain things like material escalation and finding that more of the storm sewer needed to be replaced and things like that. And of course, the right-of-way cost a little bit more than we anticipated. Next slide. On this slide, we have a graphic that shows the three different phases of this project in the purple. And those are along the map of Ralston Road. And so the first phase was the utility piece of things, and that's almost wrapped up. The second phase was working on the north side of Ralston Road between Estes and out to Yukon, and then on the south side between Garrison and Estes. And then phase 3 will be the flip of that. And as you can see, we're about 60% complete with phase 2. And then going back to the top, we show when the different notice to proceeds started and where they are along the entire project timeline.
May I ask you just a quick question? So the current schedule looks like it's construction completion in October of 2023 or fall of 2023.
Yes, sir.
What was the original plan for the original date of completion? Do you recall?
So I believe that was
Spring of 2023?
I think it was supposed to be at least summer. I don't think it was going to be spring because we started in May of 2021. And so spring would have only been a year. And I know initially it was at least a 14-month project. So it's been pushed out another 4 months. since then.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the schedule?
Not at this point.
Thank you. Next. This shows graphics of the project schedule and then the project budget and the construction budget. And we are approximately 14 months into construction, and we have spent 55% of the budget and 46% of the construction budget. Okay, next slide. So these are the activities that have been completed in the last quarter. As you can see, we've paved the lower lifts of the north side of Ralston Road between Yukon and Estes, and the storm sewer on the north side is complete. One of the developments, Ralston Court, that is along the corridor, the wet utility connections were made. So that made it so they can get going with their construction. Most recently, we bored 750 feet of 12-inch fusible water line on the west side of the project, and that was between Estes and Garrison. And then signal poles have been installed at the 4 intersections that you can see there. And then what we have coming up is the west water line connection, and then that will complete that work. There's a little bit of utility work that needs to be completed. Concrete will be ongoing. In mid-September, we will switch traffic to the north side of Ralston Road and begin the construction on the south side. And there's another development called Ralston Gardens that the water and sanitary sewer connections will also be made for that particular project. Next slide. So challenges and risks. Some of this is the same that it's been as far as trying to get the utilities, the private utilities completed. Storm sewer, that's going to be a big push on the south side because a lot of the existing sanitary sewer is not in great condition. The developments, there have been 3 developments that have come in for development, through development review, and 2 of them, our contractor Hammond ended up being the successful bidder to do that work, which delayed the project a little bit, but we thought that as a team that it was better, instead of having 2 contractors working on top of each other, just to have, if the bid was acceptable to the developer, to just have Hammond do the work. So that worked out for Ralston Court, like I mentioned earlier, and we're still in negotiations for Ralston Gardens. And then as far as public impacts go, we're as far as the traffic not being as easy as it had been, and street closures and what have you, that does pose some problems. But next slide. Between the city and Hammond and the Arvada Economic Development Association, we're reaching out to the businesses and addressing their concerns. And then between Hammond and City of Arvada, we're taking care of the residents' concerns.
Mr. Jones?
So as you think about transitioning to the south side for construction, I'm sure that you've thought about the Arvada K through 8, what impacts are going to happen there.
Which impacts?
The impacts to Arvada K8.
Yes.
And kind of turning in on that street. I mean, how are we going to route traffic in through there if that intersection's closed and school buses and all that? Will they come in on the backside?
So the plan is to get Balsam and Carr opened up before school starts. So at least those intersections will be back open on the north side. Traffic's going to be, it'll be on the south side until mid-September, but at least the north-south portion of the intersection will be open again.
But in September is when you're switching to the south side to do construction on the south side, right?
Yes, so, but the intersection won't be closed immediately because they're going to be doing the removals and the replacement in different phases.
Got it.
So ideally, and there isn't any storm sewer that goes across Balsam specifically that would create a situation where it needs to be closed. So I imagine And I'll have to double check this, but I imagine Balsam will remain open and not be a problem for people trying to get in and out of the school.
Okay, I just know it's, getting in and out of schools on normal roads is not fun.
Right.
Mr. Fiver?
Let me clarify his question. Will there be left turns allowed into Balsam,
Left turns from
westbound?
westbound
When
traffic.
you go to the south side, you're going to have left turns from the westbound side. Will that be allowed onto Balsam?
No, because there's only going to be 2 lanes.
So there will be traffic impacts, so
Oh, there will definitely-
it does impede the operations
It'll,
of the school.
it'll impede the traffic, sir. Yes, absolutely. But
So-
it won't be closed.
Yeah, but does it make it easy? It's been hard even for us to get here to City Hall when there's no left turn, so I could let alone understand the school and the school buses. So have we mitigated any of those issues for the school to open, for those school buses? I don't know which direction they come. Have we coordinated with the school district? Have we talked to how they're going to do egress, ingress into the school?
That's a really good point. I will look into that.
Because
No.
circulation of those buses are going to be a nightmare on that
Okay.
road.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Pfeiffer, will you ask my next question as well?
Yeah, so if you, yeah, no problem, Mr. Jones, but if you could just find out and get back to us, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
There are no other questions on that. I think, the bottom line here is that this is a huge project. It's very disruptive. But then when you drive on the section between Old Wadsworth and Wadsworth Bypass and turn and look at it, how great that turned out, that once we get this done, generations of Arvadans that follow us will say, thank you for getting this done and doing it right. So thanks
you
for
for
your
that.
work, and
Thank you.
we'll get there.
All right, I would like to introduce my colleague, Britton Thomas, to discuss West 72nd.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alicia. Next slide, please. My name is Britton Thomas, and I'll be presenting the update for West 72nd Avenue. As far as our right-of-way acquisition, we've acquired the majority of the properties we need. We have 1 parcel left to acquire, and we are still currently negotiating with that homeowner. We believe that we will be able to settle with that homeowner and not need to go into the eminent domain process. 1 parcel did go into eminent domain, and we're expecting a valuation trial later this year. Next slide, please. This slide just presents the overall schedule at the top, and then a quick overall of the 3 different construction packages. As you can see, we've started CP2. CP1 is finished at this point, and we're still tracking to start CP3 next year. Overall, the whole project, we're looking to be finished in Q4 of 2025. Next slide, please. Here's a quick overview of our budget. You can see total project budget, we've spent a little bit over 22% so far of our budget. Again, pre-construction services there. The owner's rep is about 50% spent, and our design is nearly 100% spent at this point. Next slide, please. Here's our construction budget. As you can see, CP1, 85% complete. As I said, that portion is complete. We're just finishing up paperwork, as-built, that sort of thing, to finish up, and then final payment. CP2 has started. We've spent just about 11% so far, and so it's well underway. CP3, we're hoping to begin early next year. And the material procurement package, we're looking to hopefully start that later this year. That would be the steel for the underpass and the bridge. Next slide, please. Schedule for CP1, we are complete. We completed on time, punch list items taken care of. So all we're doing is final paperwork now. Next slide, please. CP2, so this is all the work between Swadley and Oak Street. We're well underway and are tracking for a February of 2024 completion with landscaping to follow in the spring and summer months. Next slide, please. CP3, so you'll notice from the last update that we've changed to just include, say, quarter 3, quarter 4, that sort of thing, instead of tracking a month, because we seem to be changing those every time we come back. So this is the way we're going to present it till we get sort of more concrete dates on things. Primarily, this is due to Union Pacific Railroad and just getting through their review process. Most recently, we have had 60% bridge plans returned with additional comments. We turned that back around and submitted to them last Friday, and so those plans are back in. But we don't have a lot of confidence that UPRR is going to get us through in a timely manner. So that's why you see, us changing the dates to quarter 4, let's say, and things like that. Next slide, please. Going into a little more detail on the Union Pacific Railroad, grayed out are the items that we've completed so far. Like I said, we have resubmitted our 60% bridge plans last Friday. We're expecting a 4 to 6 week turnaround. You'll see that the last set of plans, it was in for review for 10 weeks. That was more than we expected, and we're told that that was kind of an outlier, that they are expecting to turn around plans in 4 to 6 weeks now.
Were there a lot of changes that were required with the
There was
resubmittal?
about a month of work by our consultant. So a few new comments, a few that they wanted additional details. We felt like we had presented at least a 60% plan set the last time, with maybe just a few components lagging that 60%, and they said, no, you got to have everything at least at 60%, and then again, a few extra comments. So it's a little bit frustrating. We are really hoping that this will be our approval on 60%, which will then kick us off for the next, for the site visit for 90% bridge plans and also for the shoe fly tracks. We have to get through 60% before they will even look at the rest of the stuff. So I think we do have a really good package that went in this time. We addressed every single comment. We have a comment, a response for every single comment. And so the whole team feels like we should be receiving approval this time.
Very good. Mr. Pfeiffer?
So that I understand this, what's in front of us, on June 2021, 60% bridge plans submitted. Was that submitted to UPRR?
June of 21.
2021,
yes.
The fourth bullet down. So
Yeah.
June 21 we submitted, and then the 60% bridge plans resubmitted, revised abutment on December 2021. I'm assuming that was back to UPRR as well.
Yes, correct.
And then you got another resubmittal in March 22, and then one just a few weeks ago or a week ago,
Yep,
or this week.
that's correct.
And so with those 60% complete design, the comments they gave you back in, I'm assuming March, or when? I guess they just gave it to you recently.
Yeah, we received comments back. Let me think here.
What's in front of us?
It was
Oh, you're streaming?
right around the 1st of June, roughly, that we received comments back.
June?
Or
So-
well, it was a little bit after that.
So, but did they, I guess I'm just trying to get the timeline. It sounds like they've had plenty of opportunity. Did they give us comments back from the June 21 submittal, the December 21 submittal, the March 22 submittal, and now August? Are they revisiting things? Are they skipping things? What's causing so many resubmittals?
One thing that happened in the middle there was that we initially probably the first two submittals were a certain type of bridge abutment design that they had seen on other crossings in the area. Eventually, we got around to the fact that they didn't like that type of abutment. They wouldn't just come out and say it, but trying to push that style of abutment through, it just wasn't happening. So we changed the abutment style, did kind of a big redesign, and so they saw that on the March of 2022 submittal. And then, so there were some additional comments from that.
From that change?
From that change,
Okay.
yes. But this will be the fourth submittal of 60%.
Should I be a betting man? That would be good. I'm a little worried. I mean, maybe we need to talk to our delegation about, I mean, come on. I mean, we're looking at over a year of submittals. And I get some of it could be us, but I'm looking at the mayor to call his friend before he leaves office to see if maybe he can do something. Or any of us could call our friends. But because, I mean, this is just taking a long time. Is this causing any delay to our project?
Yeah, I mean, it is, for sure. Potentially we could be kicking off CP3, later this year instead of next year.
Is there any penalties or fines for delay of the project by the contractor?
No.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have. Thanks.
Next slide, please. Community feedback. We had a public open house back in April that was well attended. We will have one more once we kick off CP3. In the last 3 or 4 months, we've had 37 contacts from citizens, and that comes in through email, through phone calls, also out in the field. We have residents that'll wave us down to ask questions. Most questions have come from traffic related items, some lane closures, things like that. We did have some Comcast internet interruptions due to their work in the corridor. And we did have one resident that experienced a little bit of mud in her yard that was washed into her yard from the construction site. That came in one of the bigger rainstorms here recently. We cleaned that up and then made some changes to the construction site. And a further storm a few days later, she did not have any mud that came down into her yard from a bigger storm just a few days later. And so we continue to monitor that to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And I don't believe we've received a call from that resident since then. So I think we've made corrections for that particular resident. And we continue to respond as quickly as possible to any questions or concerns from the public.
Mr. Mormon?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for your due diligence and attention to those particular issues with those residents. I really appreciate that. I hear from them, and so I thank you for that.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Challenges and risk. Union Pacific will be at the top of this list until this project is complete.
Thank goodness we didn't have a ditch company to deal with, too.
Right. Supply chain, we've seen some minor delays from getting some materials. We talk about that every single week to hopefully order stuff, order materials ahead of time to mitigate that, our current world that we live in. Steel is also one of those things. Fabricating steel has a 1-year lead time right now. That's typically in the past you'd see maybe 6 months on that, so that's quite a big lead time. So we're looking to hopefully order that steel later this year here. Comcast, this is more recent here, but Comcast, we've had some delays based on them not relocating their facilities quickly enough. We've continued to work with them at times, having 3 or 4 meetings a week just to make sure that they are staying on track. They've delayed us from installing the wall. At this point, it's a minor delay at this point, and we have started the wall now, but we had to keep on them. And so we continue to do that with all of the dry utility providers to get their facilities relocated. This project, we are expecting to exceed budget. The reasons for that are some due to project delays from Union Pacific, Excel, and right-of-way, but the majority of the is due to price escalations. On the right side of the slide, you'll see all of these commodities over here: oil, diesel, gasoline, and freight, to point out one that's almost 500% over the last 2 years. And our project is seeing those price escalations as well. All this information on the right here comes from CDOT, and so everything throughout the states is seeing those price escalations, and we're trying to mitigate that as best we can. Moving forward, what we're doing is we're getting preliminary pricing on CP3 from our contractor so that we know what we're expecting. Our finance department is looking into ways to find additional funding, and our design team is looking into ways to save money on the project, cost-saving options. So all those things are happening, and we'll continue to move forward and get this project completed.
Something perhaps maybe more for Rachel or whoever as it pertains to the real estate acquisitions that we had to do. I'm sure our numbers were greatly impacted by the incredible real estate market that's been happening here in Arvada and throughout the region, that I'm sure we've all seen it with our own values of property skyrocketing, that those individuals who were adversely affected by having a partial taking have really benefited by a huge increase in value to their properties in this process, I would imagine.
That's correct. And whenever we do a process like this where we're acquiring property, we do pay fair market value. And since that has changed very drastically, as you noted, over the past few years especially, that has impacted what we're paying for those properties.
Okay. Appropriately so, but it's part of the reality. Mr. Jones?
Just a question. Again, it feels like it could be a challenge or a risk, but going back to UPR and the struggles that we've had just to get the 60% or design kind of through their wheelhouse, how do we feel about the shoe fly construction and our ability to engineer that? What resources do we have at the ready to kind of help us get through that process?
I would say our consultants, for one. They've done railroad construction previously. And so that, and let's see, lost my train of thought there. But that will help mitigate it. I'm sure there will be items during construction where the Union Pacific Railroad is going to hold us up from time to time. They held us up on boring the water line underneath the railroad that we did earlier this year. And, due to what seemed like a minor issue, but it held the project up for a week, So we're expecting those kinds of things, and we'll try to work with them as closely as possible to hopefully mitigate that and, keep on schedule.
So from a funding perspective with the bonds, those delays, are we putting any of that, because don't we have to have the projects completed within a certain period of time? Will we have an issue if there's continued delays with those bond payments and bond structure? And it's probably a better question for Mr. Archer.
It looks like he's prepared to answer it.
I'll give it a shot. Ultimately, the 3-year only affects us now from an arbitrage calculation. And so as long as we're continuing to make progress on the project, we'll be okay. If it ends up longer than a 5-year horizon, we have some additional documentation that we need to do, but we should be okay at this point. Now, if it does get stuck even longer than that, then I'd have to contact legal counsel for help.
Next slide, please. So just to wrap it up, takeaways, Ralston Road Phase 2, utility relocations and installation have taken place over the entire corridor. Paving began in May, and we're expecting that traffic shift in September. For 72nd Avenue, construction package number 2 is well underway, and our third construction package is at 60% plans in with UPRR. As I said last Friday, those plans went back in, and we're hoping to keep on schedule and get CP3 kicked off next year. With that, are there any other questions?
Mr. Pfeiffer, you're first.
Hey, so did we by any chance look at, what is it, grade separation funding or grants? You know,
We did take a brief look at that. We felt that with this project underway.
Oh, it federalized it and then caused a
Right.
problem. Okay, I remember
Right.
now that you said that.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure. I know we're kind of over budget, so if there's, I'm still looking in the couch for coins, so that might have been one.
That's not a good one.
I might bring it up again because I'll forget that probably.
Okay.
Ms. Smith?
I'm just wondering, with some of the partnerships that you mentioned, Excel, Comcast, are there ways that we can recoup some of the loss of, you know, our timelines and getting things done with those private entities?
I would say it's difficult, but we are tracking the delays, and so you have to track the delays. Like, some delays don't mean much because it's not on the critical path, and some do. And sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out which delays do affect the critical path because it might not happen for 3 months. You know, a delay now might end up, if we get an early winter, we might not be able to pave when we want to. So we wouldn't see, you know, the impact for several months. You know, we're still hoping that we're going to be able to, you know, keep moving and our contractor can make things happen and, you know, not see those big delays. But we are continuing to track, and we'll continue to analyze that question in the future.
So, Councilmember Smith, if I could add to Mr. to Britton's comments, we are also documenting any delays that have a material impact based on our franchise agreement with each of the utilities. So our city engineer is very exceptional at documenting these kinds of issues. We've made the dry utility companies aware of you know, potential claims that we may make. I think we had a discussion, as you guys know, at CML, where we indicated that we, you know, were documenting items and pushing for a better working relationship. Just recently, we did have basically a team building meeting with Excel on the site. It was intended to facilitate better communication and coordination. And I think so far that's working from everything we can see. We'll stay on it to make sure that it doesn't slip back. And then with respect to Comcast and the other utilities, again, if they cause us any delays that are materially impacting the project, we will use the franchise agreement to make claims in order to receive that, whatever the funding is back.
Yeah, the folks at Excel are very chagrined that we have much better record keeping than they do. So I think we're in a much better position than they are as we look to possible claims under the franchise agreement. Mr. Mormon?
Yes, I want to revisit the question that came up on the Ralston Road, but as it applies to 72nd. So school starting. So we have Lincoln Academy. So what coordination is happening on there with traffic and helping, you know, mitigate that with them?
Traffic at Lincoln Academy specifically, I don't think will be impacted greatly. We have traffic kind of on the north side of the road currently, and then we wouldn't switch them over probably till the end of the year. But the Oak intersection would stay open, aside from, lane closure here and there and things like that. We work very closely with Lincoln Academy. Typically, they have representation at each of our weekly meetings, so they're well aware of our schedule, and we work closely with them. As far as Oberon, which has quite a few more students walking to school, we have a kind of a paved walkway on the north side, and we've added some cones to separate vehicle traffic from anybody walking along there. And we'll continue to make sure that that's in place. And then the first week of school, we're planning on having our owner's rep out there when kids are walking to school and coming home to make sure that they don't try to cross where you shouldn't. We will have sidewalk closed signs to make sure those students don't try to cross 72nd, and hop the barrier into the construction zone, that sort of thing. So, yeah, we're well aware, and we're working with them. One other thing that we're doing is we have a pedestrian walking map that we just created, and we're going to share that with Oberon especially to show which sidewalks are open and which are closed for those students.
Good, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you for the presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep these projects moving forward. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I believe we are going to have the sub-area planning efforts update. And Ryan's going to introduce this item. Thanks, Ryan.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for being here. I am just going to kick off a workshop on the sub-area planning efforts that we've been doing, and Patty McCarthy is going to talk about the Newtown area and the Northwest area. But just as by way of background, I wanted to remind Council of two things. Number one, this was kicked off as a result of some of the conversations that you all had at your strategic retreats that we had. In fact, discussing a Northwest area sub-area plan was the #1 priority. That was, I believe it was the winter retreat in 2020 when you guys were discussing the Northwest area and what the plans were for that. And so we began that work shortly after. And then Newtown is also a dramatic area of change as a result of the mixed-use zoning that was part of the new land development code that came in about in May of 2020. So where we're doing these sub-area plannings are really focused on not the stable neighborhoods like Lake Arbor or Westwoods or Club Crest or anything that's established that isn't intended to change, but it's really in these commercial corridors that have mixed-use zoning that are more flexible and could respond more to market changes. And so that's why we've done it in this area, and obviously these are our first two. The other thing that I want to mention is that while Patty is going to be talking about some overall concepts and things that are being discussed with the community, it's important to know that this is not even intended to be a conceptual plan that we're bringing forth in order to say this is what the community is going to look like. Rather, what this is an opportunity to listen to the community at this point in time and really understand where they're at. As you know, we hear development cases and those types of things, and the neighbors will talk about site-specific issues of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing and those types of things, but it's really around a specific topic. This gives us an opportunity to understand how the community broadly feels about a certain area and where that future is going in a environment where we're not talking about a very specific thing. And so it allows you just to have that additional information, so if projects should come forth in the future, then you can use that as background as part of your analysis as to whether or not it's appropriate to carry those forward, because you have a broader community context in these areas. So we'll continue doing these, but for now, Patty's going to talk about the Newtown area and the Northwest area. Thanks.
Good evening. Tonight's presentation, as Ms. Director Stachelski mentioned, is to present an overview of the draft plan framework elements and recommendations for the Newtown Subarea Plan and Northwest Arvada Subarea Plan. Your input and feedback during this presentation is important in developing the next steps to complete the final draft plan. Next slide, please. Subarea planning focuses on a specific geographic area and where we are in the city to create goals and policies for topics such as land use, transportation, design, and others. The subarea plan helps to create the long-term vision for future redevelopment and redevelopment in these areas. As Director Stachelski indicated, the purpose of the planning effort to use the community's overall vision and guide future development projects in this area. Next slide, please. The Newtown and Northwest Arvada Subarea plans initiated in 2020, and we're currently near completion of the draft plan framework recommendations stage, as shown at the realized portion of this timeline. And these recommendations will be utilized and used during this process, getting refinement to finish the draft plan. We met with Planning Commission last week as well to present the same information, and a couple of items where I would like to bring to your attention during their comments. Generally, there was a request for sustainability and infrastructure discussions and a request for the plan to address sustainability within these areas as part of the city's overall policies. In addition, affordable housing was another element that was discussed. There are a few recommendations throughout the plan, primarily the Land Development Code, as Director Stachelski mentioned, was updated a few years ago, and that also includes incentives for low affordable housing by allowing increased height, which can get an additional story, and then also parking reductions for these types of affordable developments. Next slide, please. The overall goal of the Newtown Subarea Plan is guided by the vision statement created or shown on this plan, and in the interest of time, I will not repeat this one. Next slide, please. The Newtown Subarea is generally defined as a commercial corridor along Wadsworth Boulevard and bypass between the G-line tracks on the north and Interstate 70 to the south. The Arvada Marketplace Center along 52nd Avenue is also included. The draft focus elements for the plan were developed with the community and stakeholder groups throughout the process. These include land use, parking, views, connectivity, and design. Next slide, please. Community engagement was an important part of this process, and efforts to guide the development for both of these plans that included 4 open houses, Speak Up Arvada surveys, and 3 technical and steering committee meetings. Next slide, please. A variety of feedback from the community and stakeholders was received through this process. It consisted of responses to questions, surveys, and community events. The project team then evaluated their feedback to identify common goals, understand areas of consensus, opportunities, and concern. This approach was also done for the Northwest Arvada Subarea Plan. The draft framework and recommendations as presented for the Newtown Subarea Plan have been informed and guided by the land use and redevelopment, parking, views, and connectivity goals that were developed through this process and as shown on the slide. Next slide, please. Development opportunities in the Newtown Subarea Plan include redevelopment of existing land uses on underutilized properties and intensification of densities, both commercial and residential. We heard from the community that residential and commercial development was very important in this area, and the appropriate predominant land use for the area south of West 52nd Avenue was auto-oriented commercial uses. Higher density multifamily residential development and affordable housing are desired in this area as well. Proximity to transit and higher density housing could attract attainable housing and additional population needed to diversify commercial uses preferred by the community. Next slide, please. Draft recommendations to accomplish the preferred land uses are changing mixed-use transit to mixed-use transit with the reduced height of 65 feet on the east side of the Wadsworth bypass between 53rd Avenue to 55th Avenue. This was in response to a preferred height transition, lowering those heights next to the Columbine neighborhood. This would be implemented through the Land Development Code regulations and zoning map. The second recommendation includes mixed-use transit to mixed-use suburban and/or mixed-use urban zone districts at the southeast corner of Wadsworth Boulevard and West 52nd Avenue, also known as the Marketplace. This was to accomplish the preferred auto-oriented land uses that was desired by the community, as mentioned in the previous slide, and would be implemented through Land Development Code and zoning map. Thirdly, to change the mixed-use transit to mixed-use suburban for the southwest corner of Wadsworth Boulevard and West 52nd Avenue, also where the Costco development is. And this, again, was to accomplish the preferred auto-oriented land uses implemented through the Land Development Code and zoning map. Higher density multifamily and affordable housing residential development is recommended to study and possibly include Land Development Code modifications to encourage more uses in this area. The mixed-use suburban and mixed-use urban zone districts are more conducive to the preferred auto-oriented uses south of West 52nd Avenue through land development regulations for these districts. Next slide, please. Another draft element of the sub-area plan is
Sorry, can I stop
Yes.
you?
Yes.
Can we go back really quick?
Yes.
Just so the third bullet, is that a typo then? Because it says MXT 80 to MXT 80.
Yes, I believe it's corrected on this slide, so I apologize. We had it corrected on the presentation slide, and the original one, yes, it is a typo.
Okay, thank you.
Apologize. Another draft element of the sub-area plan is parking. Large overparked areas currently exist in this area and offer an opportunity for redeveloping, allowing for additional density and better use of the land. We heard from the community that overall, generally, there is too much parking for the existing developments in the area, and there was a strong response that appropriate parking for future development is very important. The draft recommendations to ensure parking for redevelopment included encouraging reduced parking for infill development, specifically mixed-use types of development, and then with each development, evaluate the reduced parking requirements and also ensure that there's appropriate parking.
Mr. Marriott?
Yeah, so I have a question on this slide or this topic. So I wouldn't argue with that within this area, there is places where there's excess parking, but I would say that's due to the current user, not necessarily the current land use. I'll take, for instance, whether it's the PetSmart or the Office Depot that on this slide shows a couple hundred excess parking spaces, but a different user of that building may very well have a very different outcome. And so how does this plan differentiate between the user of this in its current configuration versus a different use of the land and using the current user as this defines that there's too much parking because the current user doesn't use it all?
The Land Development Code has, as you mentioned, the more current parking regulations based on uses, and as mixed-use development hopefully occurs in this area, those would be applied. We generally ask this question as well from the community to ensure that they felt that these open parking lots were not appropriate in the future. So that the recommendation is to have each development as it comes in evaluated for reduced parking requirements to ensure that they do have the appropriate amount based on that new use. Hopefully that answers your question.
You know, I think it's a part of an answer. I guess the part
Okay.
I have a problem with is the information you have here on this particular slide in the defining the excess parking. I would submit to you that the excess parking here is not defined by the land use, but the excess parking here is defined by the user of these particular parcels, the current user of these particular parcels, which can change very easily without the land use changing. And so I guess I just don't buy the current definition that there is a bunch of excess parking here. I mean, there clearly is based on the user, but as a land use perspective, it doesn't. However, I do agree with you completely that, you know, if redevelopment were to occur here, that taking an accurate appraisal of how much parking there is and not having an excess, but also not having a shortage is absolutely the right thing. So to me, when I first saw this slide, I just have, you know, shopping in that area frequently, and particularly with some additional development that's happening in that area, I have a hard time looking at, for instance, where the In-N-Out Burger is going to go and saying, wow, there's 500 extra spaces there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm guessing when In-N-Out gets built, there won't be 500 extra spaces there, that's going to change very quickly. And so I'd just be careful with this type of calculation.
Thank you for your comment.
These are just based off of our current parking requirements.
Right.
So it's not necessarily, as you mentioned, the user, but these are just the excess parking spaces that if you take our base parking requirement.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean somebody can't go above that.
Sure.
So that allows for the flexibility, and we would evaluate that with any development proposal.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Mormon?
Thank you. So if I understand right, I mean, the current situation is we have, you know, very large retail, big box stores in this area. And from what I'm seeing, we want to move into more a mixed use kind of approach. How are we going to do that? How are we going to get there when we've got, you know, these predominant stores with their big boxes and big parking lots?
It would occur through redevelopment and future redevelopment, and so this plan would help guide what that future redevelopment would look like. The mixed-use zoning, as mentioned earlier, is a 2-year recently added to our updated land development code, so it would be dependent upon the future market and the desire of the developers in this area. So currently it is primarily auto-oriented, as you mentioned, with the big boxes and the parking areas.
Well, and I would say we got to have a discussion. Frankly, I like having the big boxes there.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the sales tax they generate for this community, it's huge. So are you indicating that you think we ought to do away with the big boxes?
I wasn't implying that, Mayor.
Okay.
I was just, I mean, and this is where the confusion, and we had this conversation a week ago about In-N-Out, is we've got this proposed direction we want to go to mixed use, but this area is not going anywhere near that right now.
That's right.
And so that's the question I'm raising is how are we going to change that if that's really where
And
we're
I guess the
headed?
question is, do we want to? That's my fundamental question.
So if it's all right, I'd like to weigh in with a couple of points just about this. So number one, in terms of direction, I would probably reframe the discussion of that the land development code and the comprehensive plan is not necessarily giving direction that it's supposed to be mixed use, period, and so therefore we're expecting any future development to have a mix of uses. What it does is offers flexibility to allow for a mix of uses. However, if we wanted to switch out like for like of Home Depot for Home Depot Part 2 or whatever, that's allowed under this code. We're not restricting it to continue to develop the way it is developing in this context because the mixed use offers a flexibility. I think what we are progressive on and what we're leaning forward with and looking at is understanding how the future of land uses might change, particularly in the retail world. So retailers or landowners get the biggest bang for their buck when they get the most leasable square footage. Well, when you are dealing with parking and you're dealing with how big your big box store is or whatnot, there's not a whole lot of area to go except for up. But when you start going up, you start not being in the same market as commercial, because commercial doesn't want to be on a second floor. Maybe some office and those types of things, but certainly not retail and what we're talking about here. So what this does is it allows the future of development to be a little bit more creative and think about how can they maximize that area for their benefit and redevelopment while maintaining the auto-centric, some of the things that they have there. So I will point out that this council, or the council that approved the 2020 Land Development Code, also recognized the fact that sales tax is the bread and butter of this community. And just to be blunt, we don't want apartments wiping out our Costco. That Costco is incredibly important to us, as well as all the other businesses in the area. So there is a provision in our code that is a conditional use permit for any residential anywhere in mixed-use zoning in this sub-area. And so therefore, it would be a very thoughtful and deliberate decision by this council and the developers and those and the community if it were to go in the direction that you're suggesting. We're not suggesting that it needs to go there. We're just giving the opportunity so that we can make sure that this area is vibrant, because at the end of the day, that's what it needs to be, because it is such an important intersection for us all.
Thank you.
Mr. Fiver?
So can I just run through a scenario just so I can understand? Because sometimes when we do redevelopment, sometimes it's like a scrape and rebuild, right? Would there be a scenario in which, like I'm thinking over where it says the 482 spaces, which is the Sam's Club area. You know, there is a lot of dead space in the middle, and maybe when that was approved, the parking ratio was a lot higher. Would there be an opportunity, like, it's kind of like the In-N-Out Burger, but I could see the middle of that turning into some other development without ruining the retail around the outs of the parking lot. So would that be a scenario in which this would give us an opportunity to be flexible with that property? Say the center of the property changed to maybe mixed use, or a little downtown little.
Well, the whole property
placement?
is mixed use, and yes, at the direction of the property owner.
Yeah, but let me make sure. I get that we say it's mixed use, but when that was approved, it was commercial.
Yes.
They're not scraping the whole property, and they're not changing it all, so they still are commercial.
Yes.
Under their guidance. But knowing that property was approved under commercial, is there still flexibility for, let's say, portions of that commercially, when it was zoned, commercial be mixed use? In other
Yes.
words, just partially developed, not
Yes,
fully.
partially redeveloped. I mean, even think about where the Bad Daddies and Nukes and all that,
Yeah.
they tore down parts of those buildings
Yeah.
and then made the patios. So just take that as a hypothetical, and let's pretend that they didn't put Bad Daddies there and Hoo-Hot, but they put residential there, but just in those blocks, and they kept everything else the same. That is totally allowed. And
Well, and I think where this goes to is we have a parking ratio that may or may not allow that, say, infill of that parking pool, that massive parking lot. Are you suggesting if we change some of the
land uses inside of it?
Yeah, and the parking space, that does free up square footage that could be opened up in the center of that parking? Because I have to say, the parking lots are way too big. I mean, they are way massive. Let's just, regardless of math and whatever we want
Sure.
to do, they just seem way massive. I just think there's better use, and I think that's what the community is trying to imply here is, can we just do a little bit? And I get what John's saying about you just don't know what the user is one day that can change that dynamic of it. But if we're thoughtful and deliberate, using your words, and we reduce the parking ratios, they could do some very place-making commercial mixed use in the center of that sea of parking lots.
And
Go ahead, Ryan.
oh, sorry. Well, the one thing I will say is we're not intending to reduce the parking ratios as per the code. What we're saying is that they're overparked as viewed by the community, even in excess of the code. So we're not coming here and saying like a big box store needs to go from a ratio of 5 per thousand to 4 per thousand or something like that and reduce the parking. We're just saying that they're overparked as it is now, and so there may be opportunities to utilize some of that open asphalt for something else. However, at any development, we're going to evaluate how that parking works, because we want to make sure, as you guys look at the mixed-use project, for example, in Candela's, making sure that how the residential component of that works with the commercial component and that there aren't conflicts. So that evaluation would be done when a new land use comes in. I think to Mr. Marriott's point, he was really talking about the reuse of an existing building that may go from a business that is there now to one that has a lot more turnover and a lot more customers that are coming in on a more frequent basis, which would better utilize or more utilize the existing parking in that scenario, not a wholesale land
Well, the
use.
user can definitely drive it. Look at
Yes.
Home Depot, it's very clear in this photo. You know,
Yeah.
it's full, and you park all the way out to Wadsworth.
Sure.
That's the user. If Office Depot becomes
Trader Joe's.
Trader Joe's, that whole parking lot, that's fine, whatever one you want to pick.
Lauren came up with that first.
But that could fill up that whole parking lot,
Yes.
and meanwhile, we went back and put a little, 5,000 square foot commercial in the middle of that parking lot that might have consumed some of those spots. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's saying, but, if we change it, so let me kind of go back. I want to go back to this other scenario. When we approved the commercial years and years ago where the Sam's Club is, the ratio might have been, I don't know, 5 times what it is today, or 3 times, or 2 times, whatever that number is. When you reevaluate, there's already existing zoning commercial, but if somebody says, well, I want to put something in the middle of that parking lot, you would look at the whole property with today's parking ratio to see if not only do we support the existing businesses, but the proposed 2-story mixed use in the middle of the sea of parking asphalt.
Yeah, yes, we would definitely evaluate that.
Then you could determine.
Yeah.
So they're not stuck to the zoning they originally were approved under. They would be, even though they're not scraping and rebuilding. I just want to be really clear about that,
Yeah.
because I think that opens up opportunities for not the landowner. You're saying, the values in the square footage, but also for us to be very clear that, I fundamentally have an issue with the sea of asphalt. I think it's not good. It heats up the air. I mean, there's all sorts of thoughts around it. So any way we could reduce that footprint, I would encourage it.
Sure, certainly, and there's always, the opportunity, at some point, the land values may be to a point where structured parking becomes
Right.
a possibility, and that then helps kind of maintain that equilibrium so that you can get the mixed use while still providing enough parking for a Trader Joe's or a Home Depot or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I appreciate that conversation.
Okay, you can continue.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Views from Old Town Transit Station platform and plaza were identified as a resource for the community, and the mixed-use zoning permitted development heights of the sub-area just south of the tracks were situated, and the heights were determined to preserve the important views to the south from the platform station. During this process, the community expressed a desire to preserve these view corridors, but allow redevelopment that would occur and that would accommodate the building heights. A planning commissioner had a comment that I'd like to share with you, that to consider tree growth within these corridors, and that they could occur within the air view corridors and impact those view corridors. We will address this in the draft plan. During the result of the draft recommendation is to preserve the views from the Old Town Station transit platform, which are important from this location as identified on this drawing. The 3 of those view corridors include, in purple, the downtown Denver view corridor, the orange corridor is Mount Evans, and yellow is the Front Range corridor. Next slide, please. A goal of the plan is to identify and approve connectivity that serves all users with a focus on strengthening the network opportunities in this area and safety. One of the prominent comments we heard was to improve bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety, and to identify opportunities for improved connectivity and safety, and finally, having accessible and safe connections within the sub-area to multimodal facilities and the surrounding neighborhoods. This map focuses on overall connectivity and did not include existing and proposed bike trails as identified in the city bike master plan. And I'll discuss that further on the next slide. Next slide, please. In response to improve connectivity concerns, this map was created during the process to identify potential opportunities and preferred pedestrian connections, including trail access within and near the sub-area. The primary ones to focus on were Vance Street connection north that would continue north to Old Town, and then also West 55th Avenue at the Wadsworth Boulevard were strongly desired by the community as key connectivity points. The unsignalized intersection at West 55th Avenue and Wadsworth Bypass was also identified to be very important, especially improving safety and providing access from the Columbine neighborhood, specifically across Wadsworth Boulevard to the west. The City Bicycle Master Plan proposes improvements in the sub-area not shown on this plan, and the intent of the bike plan was to have off-street trail system that establishes a low-stress standard for the cyclists accessing the area. Within the sub-area, the City Bicycle Master Plan includes proposed improvements potentially occurring on West 52nd Avenue, and then additionally, West 55th Avenue and West 56th Avenue corridors are identified as buffered bikeways. In addition, existing and planned connections from the Bike Master Plan include connections to Clear Creek Trail and Interurban Trail consistent with this drawing. The sub-area plan will further support and prioritize the low-stress bike network concept as identified in the City Bicycle Master Plan.
I assume when you say low stress, you mean keeping the bikes and the cars separate?
Exactly, yes. Creating conditions which are safer and more conducive to having bike widths that are appropriate.
I can tell you, anytime my wife is behind me on the tandem, she prefers that we are very separated from vehicle traffic.
Yes.
So this makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to keep that separation. Ms. Smith?
Yes, you mentioned that the prominent comment that you're hearing, or the prominent comments that you're hearing, are around pedestrian and bike lanes. And so I feel like it's a bit of mixed signals that we're seeing a recommendation of mixed-use transit to mixed-use suburban when this is a prime transit-oriented area and there's a overwhelming desire from the community to have more multimodal. So I'm a little confused why we're trying to suggest to go to suburban when we have that mixed-use transit suggestion already.
Ms. Smith, I can help answer that question. So the only really transition that we're talking about from a mixed-use transit MXT to an MXS is really south of 52nd, when there's really a disconnect from where the pedestrians want to go. So the pedestrians are interested, and in particular, I think the most vocal group was the Columbine neighborhood that really was talking about pedestrian access across 55th Avenue in order to be able to make their way up to Old Town. So while we are talking about that and about pedestrian access and those types of things, what we're talking about is access to trails in safe ways, and then we're also talking about access to amenities, which in this case is mostly Old Town Arvada, so it's pushing it north. I think it's recognized that the intersection of 52nd and Wadsworth may very well be the busiest intersection in the state from a local jurisdiction standpoint. It's the confluence of Wadsworth Boulevard, the second busiest state highway, I-76 and I-70. And so to think that that would be a pedestrian focus or a pedestrian oriented intersection is probably just not realistic in terms of a land use planning and where it would go from there. But certainly as we look up north and into 55th Avenue on Vance Street, and when we'll be connecting the Old Town residents that's obviously under construction, the Hilton Garden Inn, the Marriott that's coming, and connecting those aspects of Newtown with Old Town, I think is in the nature of the conversation that we heard.
Okay, thank you.
And I would like to add, the pedestrian priority streets shown on here, they're not necessarily only identifying only for pedestrian. Those are included in our land development code, and what they include are specific standards for developments to be created to be closer to the pedestrian basically to the sidewalks where the pedestrians are occurring. It's not that we're not eliminating any pedestrian connectivity, it's just that this plan includes these pedestrian priority streets identified in our land development code. And hopefully that might minimize some of the confusion.
Right. Mr. Mormon?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to jump in a little bit on the conversation about pedestrian access and bike access to the southern part of this area. I mean, well, yes, it is the most busiest intersection, and it's very auto-centric. I mean, I guess where I challenge the thinking is that we can't make it more pedestrian and bike-friendly. And I think that we need to go in that direction. I mean, in order to help alleviate traffic, for one, to be able to, you know, I mean, I'm not a transportation planner, but I mean, things come to mind that I've seen in, you know, in Lakewood and other places. Is there a way to have a pedestrian bridge or something that can make it more pedestrian accessible while still maintaining, you know, the access for automobiles at the same time? So I guess I just challenge a little bit of thinking you know, we're not going to try to focus on the pedestrian access part and that part of the city, where I think that should be also a priority.
Thank you.
Ms. Simpson?
Thank you. I don't disagree with the idea of a pedestrian walkway, particularly perhaps at the Vance and Old Wadsworth intersection. I always, with the 6 lanes each way, I always get nervous whenever there's somebody crossing to go to the McDonald's or whatnot. My greater thought, though, was about this southern path below to the south of Arvada Marketplace. I've heard from many business owners in that area about crime, loitering, graffiti, basically some unsavory elements happening in that area. Is this designed to help activate it to potentially reduce some of those? Do we have thoughts on the public safety implications of turning this into a higher traffic area?
That is a benefit, as in our Square Lake plan, is it is identified if you more activate with other users, it can help with some of those public safety concerns. I'm not sure it would eliminate it, but it may help with having more users and other to activate that trail.
And would we be potentially looking at any lighting improvements or anything in this area?
This plan is not as that specific, but that is a consideration that would typically be considered when you're doing trail planning.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What's the thought process in terms of how we could address pedestrian crossover at 55th Avenue?
That is something that we would have to work out with our transportation department. I know they've been in discussions with the Colorado Department of Transportation as well. It is under their jurisdiction. It was changed a few years ago, and its current configuration would just with vehicular access and right in and right out. That, again, is something we're trying to identify through this plan as a priority of concern, especially for pedestrian and connectivity issues and across that intersection.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. Another focus of the planning process was to engage with the community to determine the importance of architectural design in this area. The planning team used a visual preference survey conducted to solicit community feedback on architectural design and building form in this area to give general direction for future development. The visual preference survey included building designs and types, that had multiple types of heights and utilized to further refine design options within the sub-area plan. We heard from the community that one form of building design is generally important, especially along Wadsworth Boulevard and at the Arvada Marketplace development property. And in addition, the preferred design through the visual preference survey indicated that it included multiple building styles such as modern and traditional, with natural materials being preferred, including brick and stone, and then some modern elements added to the building. The draft recommendation from the public community input is to implement or seek specific guidelines or implement further standards in our land development code through amendments in order to address the preferred architect design in this area. Next slide, please. Another element of design was placemaking in small urban parks in this community, in this area. The goal was to identify areas that should be linked together, providing opportunities for community-oriented spaces. A component of the sub-area plan is to identify these areas that should be linked together and create opportunities to benefit the public and local community. Community-oriented spaces appropriate for the new town area would occur through redevelopment with small urban parks linked throughout the sub-area. This map shows the preferred locations of these urban parks that could be potentially developed in future redevelopment in this area. An urban park is intended to serve a neighborhood where opportunities for larger park sites are not available. Currently, the Land Development Code does require urban parks to be developed with new projects. However, this plan would identify where those preferred locations are to provide a better link and community spaces within the area.
Mr. Mormon?
Thank you. So if I'm reading the map correctly, then I see urban park location pretty much put at where we're looking at In-N-Out Burger. So how would that work?
It could be, these are just general locations. For example, as Commissioner Pfeiffer was indicating, there could be a potential of creating some kind of community or urban park area within the middle of that development. It's not intended to be incredibly specific, but considered with any future development for those areas.
The other thing that I'd like to add is just what we're defining as a park. So when we think of a park, we think of a playground and green space and kind of like this large open space. But really, we are thinking a lot more innovatively about what a park is. So for an example, Old Town Residence, which is currently under construction, has a urban park requirement that is being established at the northwest corner of that development that has some public art space, some seating, some hardscape, those types of things. So it's not necessarily that you're going to have your kids run around and swing at a swing set or whatnot. Another example is at Kipling Ridge, just north of the Kipling Station. There is some public art that's just north of Ridge Road there, and that area is considered to be an urban park that meets some of our park requirements. Inside the Marriott development that's going underway, there's about a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot hardscaped outdoor plaza area that is going to have public access that can be enjoyed by everybody in the community. It's not just for that development, and it has that public amenities. So when you're looking at the Arvada marketplace, we're not looking at 10,000 square feet of grass that people are going to go and walk their dog. It's really kind of integrating placemaking and open space and those kind of more urban park settings and public art and those types of things integrated into this, rather than a kind of a traditional park that you would imagine in a neighborhood today.
So as you were talking, what came to my mind was Union Station in Denver, where you have right outside Union Station, you've got the water fountains and the benches and some trees. So something similar where it's really inviting a respite, away from the street, away from concrete, so you'd have some shade and stuff. It doesn't have to be, as you said, a green, grassy park either, yeah.
Old Town Square is considered a park.
Right.
Yeah, another thought would be squiggles at the Arvada Center.
Perfect example.
And we can certainly add a note to address your concern as well, regarding it have to be at that very specific location. And these are concept and design.
Yeah, as I was looking at that, I'm thinking, well, okay, we're going to lose a fair amount of retail dollars if we built all of these as urban parks. And how are we going to pay for these urban parks if we take away the retail?
Yeah, the urban parks occur with the redevelopment, and it's the owners of the developer to include that as part of the development.
Got it.
So we can certainly, ensure that there's language in there to make that, to clarify that.
Great.
Thank you.
Because frankly, citizens have a different definition of urban parks than what we're getting tonight, and immediately think, okay, we're going to build all these, and we're not. Okay.
Appreciate your comment. Thank you. Next slide, please. Another element of design is including streetscape. It can enhance street and pedestrian experience while further defining pedestrian corridors within the area. Streetscape design elements help create safe, pedestrian-friendly paths to encourage users, improve walkability and connectivity. Potential streetscapes options considered for this plan are option A and option B. Option A is a little, the tree lawn language is a little misleading. It's really intended to identify the area between the back of curb to the sidewalk. Is that this is a xeriscape option in which there would encourage the use of shrubs, grasses, possibly small trees or rock, and get little variety and specifically towards xeriscape design. And then the second option is your traditional tree lawn. Potential streetscapes to be included, or potential streets to be included for these design options would include Vance Street between RTD Commuter Gold Line and West 55th Avenue. Future Vance Street, as it continues further to the south, the Lowe's development, potentially with any future redevelopment as a potential pedestrian boulevard connection. And then, as mentioned earlier with the Land Development Code, along the pedestrian priority streets. To implement the potential streetscape options would require the evaluation of engineering standards to accomplish these design options. Planning Commission had feedback during the workshop that they would prefer the xeriscape type option and only in limited places the tree lawn. Next.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
Yes.
Thank you. You know, it always throws me that, when we talk about like trying to improve the environment, we use these small little trees. It seems like we should be looking at more canopy trees to create more shade. I don't know why we keep drifting towards these small 10-foot, 6-foot trees. You know, I was just thinking when I was driving through Longmont, how many trees that they planted on their detached sidewalk areas that created a very comfortable walking environment, you know, instead of just in the blazing sun. So I would recommend that we focus in these areas. I agree with the xeriscaping, but let's really think about the tree canopies we can create to make a very welcoming and pedestrian-friendly environment.
Mr. Pfeiffer, that's a fair comment. The biggest challenge for us in Colorado is that's what can survive in a tree lawn, those larger trees, given our climate and particularly the salt that goes on the roads at certain points in times. We struggle with what can survive there, and those larger trees are more impacted by that. So that's one of the reasons why those trees are on our allowed list.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that. I think it works in other communities, so maybe we can do a little bit more research around the tree types, because I agree with you, the salt and stuff, but we shouldn't just engineer it because we are people that decide to throw chemicals all over the place, and maybe we should think about a different way of dealing with the trees and the way we spray chemicals everywhere. And I don't know.
We'll look for CDOT to take the lead on that, and then we'll. Sorry, I apologize.
So what we do is we cut down all the trees so we don't worry about them anymore.
Yes. For those.
Let me rephrase that. We'll work on that and look at options.
Yeah, thank you, because I'm not CDOT right now. I am actually a council member.
Okay. So another factor, though, on that is I recall vividly that in that Arvada marketplace, we had a pretty big tree canopy that the developer eventually wanted taken out so that people could see the commercial in there. So that's another competing interest that we've got to factor into it.
Yeah, but I'm thinking like when you go to Washington State, you never can find wherever the hell the grocery store is, but somehow it works. I don't know, we could just be creative in our sign code and other things. I just, if we sit here and we talk about sidewalks, I have a hard time walking down a sidewalk in the heat of the summer and there's no shade or anywhere to rest or anything like that. And so I feel like we're almost contradicting ourselves when we say, well, let's make it a walkable community, but we're not going to give any shade or any benches or anything, for anyone to encourage it. So just thought. The staff will figure it out.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Actually, before I move on to the Northwest Arvada subarea plan, are there any other comments?
I have
for
no
the
other
new
lights
town?
on. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. So the Northwest Arvada subarea plan, the overall purpose of the plan is guided by the vision statement as shown on this slide. Next slide, please. And the Northwest Arvada subarea is generally located along Highway 72 in the area east of Highway 93 to Indiana Street, and along Indiana Street between the railroad line on the south and the city boundary on the north. This area is located both within the city and unincorporated Jefferson County. The study area for the Northwest Arvada subarea plan will be developed in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the primary study area, and it's located along the Indiana Street corridor as shown red on this slide. Phase 2 is located along Highway 72 from Highway 93, just to the west side of Welton Reservoir, and is shown as purple on this map. Next slide, please. Similar to the Newtown subarea plan, going through the community engagement process, we developed draft focus elements based on their comments. And for the Phase 1 area, these focus elements included land use, connectivity, and design. Next slide, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
So just a quick question on, if you could go back one slide. Happened to be speaking with a constituent tonight who was asking about Phase 1 and why we didn't take it down Indiana to 72nd as part of the connectivity. Well, not connectivity of the trail system, but just feeding into Phase 1. What were the thoughts around that?
This is again, it was the mixed-use commercial corridors that we were focusing on for redeveloping in the future. To the south is residential, more residential. And it's a good question as far as that was a strong concern, especially with the railroad crossing through this process. And on a future slide, we'll show you some trail and connectivity that we did identify through this process that does go to Leiden Rock and some areas to further out of this Phase 1 area.
Okay. Thank you. Well, so just to follow up.
Director Stachelski would like to add to that.
Yeah, so Ryan might have been a part of that conversation a little bit. So if you could just add a little bit more color, Ryan, that would be awesome.
Sure. The constituent that was talking to us was expressing his thoughts about this plan and said, you know, in order to really understand the Phase 1 considerations, we should have taken the plan further down Indiana Street. And while we certainly acknowledge that Indiana Street is an incredibly important corridor and part of this area from a transportation standpoint, Ms. McCarthy is right. It's not necessarily an area of transition for us from a mixed use and commercial standpoint. What we're expecting is, where are we going to see the market change from that commercial aspect? Absolutely, Indiana needs to get solved, but there are also engineering considerations that need to take into place. That railroad crossing, as we heard earlier tonight, railroads are incredibly difficult and expensive to work with, and to the mayor's point, actually, there are a couple of ditches in that area as well. So we got the trifecta there of state highway, railroad crossing, and ditches to make it a perfect storm of an extremely challenging corridor. And so while we want to look at it, we also know that we didn't want to get bogged down in just having a transportation and, quite frankly, a funding conversation related to that, and really kind of understand from a land use what were possible given the constraints that we have in that area.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that was clearly stated, and I appreciate that follow-up as well as yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. The Phase 2 area, as indicated before, is going to be done in actually 2 phases. It'll be the priority for this area was land use, and as we went through this process, we also identified that connectivity is important as well. And so those are the 2 key focus elements developed through this process. And the other elements, such as transportation and the other design elements, will be considered in the future in a different plan. Next slide, please. Community engagement process, again, was similar to the Northwest Arvada plan, and it included the 4 open houses, several Speak Up Arvada surveys, and steering and technical committee meetings. Next slide, please. The common themes and goals that were used to help guide and develop the draft framework and elements as presented tonight include land use, placemaking, design, connectivity, and traffic as the overarching themes, and with the goals identified for each of these themes listed on the slide. Next slide, please. Part of this planning process was to explore the community-preferred land uses in the sub-area, primarily along Indiana Street corridor. The preferred land uses expressed by the community were primarily a need for neighborhood-focused commercial and retail with more varied land use options such as restaurants and different types of services. There was a mixed opinion on types of future residential development in this area. Either the two opinions were wanting more density versus having no more residential developments in this area.
The house is there, so don't bring any more.
And then in addition, there was also a strong desire for more open space. An opportunity during this process to increase public lands east of Welton Reservoir occurred, and it is located in the unincorporated Jefferson County area. This particular area is identified on the map. It was purchased by Consolidated Mutual Water District, and they actually expressed an interest expanding that public land designation. Since it is in Jefferson County, it is a change that would need to occur in our comprehensive plan, and that is why it is shown on this map that way. To implement it, it would require the future land use map be changed in the comprehensive plan.
Is that an area that could be flooded if something happens to that reservoir?
I'm sorry, I missed the first
Is that something where flooding or any issue would happen if the reservoir, I don't want to say dam, but there is a dam on that side? Is this an area that's of concern?
I don't believe it's of concern. However, when Consolidated Water Mutual District spoke to me, they do have this area as a safety zone, both for, I guess, if there was spillage, and then also provides to create a larger buffer around the lake for safety concerns with infrastructure.
So if that's the case, why would we, if you go to the very first, why would we encourage any type of zoning in there if it's a concern for them? Because your first map shows, I think it's mixed use, so is that?
Yes.
Are we talking about possibly changing so we can match up to what they're wanting it to be?
Yes, and to provide additional open space in the area, yes.
Yeah.
And
So
that
they
would
have-
be if any future developments came into the city.
So they have acquired that property?
Yes, they have.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So,
Quite honestly, they wanted to expand that further and eliminate all the mixed use along that area.
all the way to Indiana?
Yes.
But they haven't acquired all the way to India.
They've purchased some of them.
Well, I mean, I appreciate the public land, I do agree, but I also don't want to put people in a place where they're at risk. At one point, if I remember correctly, we were going to do apartments in that area. It might have been further north. It's
further north.
Further
It was
north,
further
but it's
north.
close to this, well.
It's the hashed area, or it's actually where the box says additional, I can't read, additional
right up
more
there.
public land. Yeah, that's what we call the fortune property.
Okay. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much a known thing right now? Is that a done deal?
That it's purchased?
Yeah,
or-
and that they
Yes.
want us to keep it open public
Mhm.
lands?
Yes, I had a direct conversation with their president.
So we should probably update any maps anyways, just so we don't bank on that's there. Because
I'm
right
so
now, I
sorry.
think our zoning shows mixed use.
It's in the county,
It's
so
in the
right now
county.
it's not our
But
zoning.
if it was annexed, it shows that we would make it mixed use.
That is correct.
And
So
that's-
that is correct.
So
Yes.
do we need to change anything in our comprehensive plans, or no, or?
Yeah,
Are
that
they
that
gonna be
would be
annexed
the
in or no?
recommendation based on what we've heard now through this plan, is that we would go in and amend the land use map
To be
to
open space?
to make it open space, yeah,
Okay.
versus the mixed use.
Okay, thank you very much.
And that's what's shown on this slide and map, is that change on our comprehensive plan. Next slide, please.
Well,
Oh,
just so I can speak to
sorry.
count, no, you're good.
Sure.
So more reason for us to protect this area for mixed-use commercial, Because I think at one point, we were really thinking this would be like a little town of some sort. At one point, I recall us having this conversation.
No, that's more to the north of this site.
Yeah, but it was a Fortune property, but if I remember correctly, I think it went down still, did it not? I can't remember how far it went. Maybe this map is deceiving. But
Yeah, it might be deceiving. The Fortune property, which is the hash mark above just that block area,
Right.
is 70 acres. That's quite large. To give you an example frame of reference, Old Town is 25 acres.
Okay, so, yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
But there had been some talk, in fact, there was a developer that talked to us about possibly doing some development on the west side of Indiana, where the crosshatch is to the east of the property that Consolidated's already acquired. So it sounds like that may be out of, I mean, if indeed they're buying that.
Well, they may buy that. They've owned that, Consolidated Mutual has owned that property for years. That's
Okay.
not a recent acquisition.
okay.
They've owned it for as long as I've been around. But regardless of that, the issue with all the crosshatch stuff to the east of that property is that it doesn't have any water until Gross Reservoir is built, because they are not in JCMD, and when they were annexed into the city, they chose not to be in JCMD, which was their source of water at the time. So we need to complete our water portfolio before we can allow people who don't have water to have water first. So they're 2028 at best before that
Got it.
area can develop.
At which point they would need to annex into the city.
Next slide, please. Existing land uses within the Phase 2 area are industrial, heavy industrial, manufacturing, outdoor storage, and with a smattering of single-family homes. And the properties along this area are located both in the city and Jefferson County. Properties within the city are zoned general commercial, light, and general industrial. The community feedback for land use in this area, again, was varied. The existing industrial zoning they considered was not appropriate by a small margin compared to the combined maybe and yes response to that question, what's appropriate for the Phase 2 area. And then in addition, the preferred primary land use for potential future redevelopment by the community was mixed use, followed by commercial and then light industrial uses. Therefore, there are two recommendations presented for further input from you as well. The first option is no land use change to the Phase 2 area. And then the second option is change industrial land uses to mixed use. And that is shown on the next slide, please. As you can see on the map, the first one is preferred land use. The gray areas is the Jefferson County portion of this area, whereas the colored areas is the existing zoning for the city. And then the second option for changing industrial to mixed use is shown on the left side for our zoning map. And since a large area is within the Jefferson County and identified on our comprehensive plan future land use map, that is shown on the right side as well, with that change of changing it from industrial to mixed use as desired by the community.
Anyone thought of changing that gas tower thing into a bar or restaurant?
I
Make it
have
a little
not
bit
heard
prettier?
that. Well, they'd have great views, wouldn't they?
Mhm.
So I'd certainly love to get your feedback on these two options as preferred for the sub-area plan.
Well, I'll chime in initially. You know, we've got such a shortage of industrial, and it is on the railroad. I'm a little concerned about changing it from that perspective. But the reality is there's so much residential that's developed around it. It's starting to feel like a Stapleton Airport situation where, you know, a desired use is being squeezed out by people who came later. So I'm more inclined to leave it as is, but certainly want to hear what others have to say. Ms. Simpson, you're next.
I actually tend to agree with you, Mayor. By by a lot, the most industrial area tends to be in the southeast side of the city, and if we remove the remaining options we have in the other places, then it's just going to continue to densify around there, and we do have residential there as well, namely the Columbine neighborhood, which we'd already seen. And so it does strike me as concern trying to limit our options there, particularly given the proximity of this area to different throughways as opposed to the southeast side being adjacent to different throughways. So I tend to agree with the mayor on this. And then also to Mr. Pfeiffer's point, check out what Chip and Joanna did with the old water tower there in Waco. It would be, it was really neat.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I would also agree with the mayor. I think that the best use is to leave it as is.
Mr. Pfeiffer?
I'd like to do a hybrid. I think for, let's just say east of the center, so your blue line in that one picture, the comp plan, going east should remain industrial or light industrial. I think because of the grade with the railroad is pretty much at grade. When you go past that blue line, the grade with the railroad's way low, so industrial use to leverage the railroad would probably not be existent because the railroad's so low into the valley. And then maybe do mixed use from that direction over. But I do think we need to protect some primary jobs out there as well. So that would be my only thought, is maybe just on the west side of that, be mixed use, the east side of that, keep it as industrial.
So are you talking more of that option 2?
Yeah, the option 2, but the blue line to the east or to the right in this picture would remain industrial. And then to the left, maybe somewhere in there. I don't know where the line is, but maybe closer towards because the railroad drops pretty low. I'm trying to picture how low it really is. I know it's pretty steep because we're looking at, that whole parking lot possibility.
I don't know that my comments were necessarily from an industrial use to have access to the railroad. I was just more of what's backing up to it.
The housing.
And I agree. I was referencing more 72 and 93, whereas the southeast conjuncts with 70 and 76 in Sheridan.
So, but you also have the landfill in that big blue area. And so the further west you get, from a mixed-use perspective, you're gonna be butting up against the landfill.
Yeah, so scrap all my ideas. You can just do whatever you want to do. I mean, because I'm even trying to think, even if they try to clean up that area, like the big tank or the big gas tower, I can only imagine what that would cost to remediate that. But I mean, I do want to keep some primary jobs. I do agree with, I'm leaning towards keeping it as is. I haven't had anyone complain. I mean, the only thing that I would want to push on is, they call it Candelas Point, which is north of 72, where the little blue square is, and there's a pink square in the right picture, the picture on the right. Just maintaining that has been the big topic, is keeping that.
That is mixed use.
That is mixed use, but keeping it commercial more than
is it
residential.
It's actually commercial.
It is. The blue, I think, is commercial in that picture, I'm thinking.
That's
or
the
no,
substation.
the pink is.
That's the
Oh, yeah,
substation.
substation. Pink is the, or
commercial.
whatever, salmon, whatever color you want to call
Yes.
that.
That would not change
that-
with these options.
Yeah, but that whole circle area needs to just be protected for commercial as much as possible. That's been the big topic. I haven't heard much
I would agree with that.
Between 72 and the railroad tracks, other than the eyesore of the tower.
But that's option 1, is what you're just saying, is keeping the option 1 preserved. Because it preserves that commercial.
Yeah, and I think the zoning option 2 here kind of illustrates it a little bit as well, so. Is that clear as mud?
Yeah, Mr. Marriott?
Yes, so I'll agree as well. I would stick with kind of the status or the option 1.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide, please. Another goal is to identify important areas to be linked together again to strengthen existing opportunities and safety for pedestrian and other users within the area. The existing trail system and identifying key locations to improve the multimodal network in the Phase 1 area was evaluated during this planning process. However, recognizing that this area was important to link with all the existing trails and address the needs in Phase 1, we also included Phase 2 as part of this connectivity plan for the potential trail system. The priority items for the trail system were completing the multipurpose trail connection at West 87th Parkway and Indiana Street, and continuing that to the west. Another one was exploring trail opportunities for undeveloped areas and explore trail system from Candelas community to the Leiden community. And in addition, identifying supporting trail connectivity to the future regional Front Range Trail to the east near Highway 93.
Mr. Jones?
So just along those same lines with that connectivity between Candelas and Leiden Rock, using the parkway alignment, the other, again, I think, you know, not knowing where that's going or what's going to happen there, but thinking about that right-of-way and how it could be used from a multimodal perspective, and egress in and out of the neighborhood. So if there's a way to layer that into the discussion around, you know, future use, if the Northwest Parkway never gets built, what is the best use of that land 10 years from now?
I'm convinced that if we go ahead and put in a gravel road with a bike trail next to it, that sucker will get paved pretty quick.
Isn't that what happened to
Leiden Road?
Yeah, I mean, I remember that as a dirt road.
Yep.
So, a scary dirt road.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know where that is in the conversation or what conversations were had around that, but I think that that's an important thing to be thinking about, again, because we've got that right-of-way there, technically. Thank you.
Mr. Fiver?
I just want to underscore that. I mean, that's the biggest thing I hear is connectivity between Line Rock and Candelas. If that's the right place for a pedestrian bridge or something to go over the railroad tracks, it just something needs to be connected. And even for the kids getting over to the K through 8, I don't know what the schooling situation is going to be over there. I don't know if they're going to build another school, but you know, it's amazing that what I hear the complaint is folks can see the house that they need to get to, and it takes 20 minutes to get there because the way that you have to get over there. But I could yet see the house across the railroad tracks that I need to walk to. So anything to connect the two communities together, even if it's just pedestrian bike for now, would be huge.
Okay. And then there is also the challenge of the railroad.
Railroad and pedestrian. That's why I say bridge. It'll probably have to be a bridge.
Yeah.
We
Thank
don't
you.
have a canal.
Okay.
All right,
may
thank you.
move on.
And then, next slide, please. Again, as discussed earlier, one of the land use elements that we heard from the community is desire for more commercial, neighborhood-focused commercial with retail uses in the Phase 1 area. New commercial and community place could be developed in the existing zone districts along the Indiana corridor. This sub-area team focused on finding ways to create a sense of place, commonly also known as placemaking, that was tied in with economic influence in response to the overwhelming feedback from the community wanting more restaurants and diversified services in this area, in addition to having spaces for family to gather within those commercial areas. A focus of the plan was trying to create and identify these sense of places for the placemaking with economic influence, basically with commercial development. The top locations were identified by the community, and the two that were selected were the initial one that Commissioner Pfeiffer was mentioning for the Fortune property. That one is located southwest corner of Indiana Street in Candelas, as shown as the top circle here on the map. And then to the south is the northwest corner of Highway 72 and Indiana Street. So in order to implement these places, the draft recommendation identifies those locations specifically to be considered for future commercial development. And then in addition, a recommendation to design and create commercial development with any future development within the sub-area, trying to focus on creating a combination of community space within the commercial areas.
Right, Mr. Fiver?
This might be a difficult discussion, and I'll look to Ryan. But one of the complaints I've got is, we put up a commercial, or we encourage a commercial development, and it goes in with just services. I know we can't really restrict that, but, we had a nice commercial development that we expected restaurants, other businesses, and it turned into all services except for Domino's.
I think
And a
there's
nail
4
store.
dentists in
Yeah, there's
there.
4 dentists and 1 shopping center. I mean, we don't make tax revenue off that really, unless I guess you're selling dentures or something, but.
Yeah, so, obviously I'm well aware of not just the voices that I've heard on council for years around this specific topic, but also all the residents in the area from Candelas, Lighten Rock, Whisper Creek, everything.
Including the city manager, I bet.
Yes, and members of his family. No, I'm just kidding. All right, sorry. I'm on fire.
You're hot tonight, Ryan.
Yeah.
You're in rare form tonight.
We're just going for it.
We're going to
here.
see you next Monday too?
Yeah, hopefully. So, anyway, but relative to this, the Fortune property is the one that we've always kind of earmarked as potentially where we could do some placemaking. And we have some particular amount of leverage with them because they have opted out of JCMD, which means as of today, they don't have water. However, we've had long-standing conversations with them that for the right thing as defined by this council, that's a conversation that we could entertain. And so if they are able to deliver on something that this community wants, that includes placemaking and the types of businesses that you're describing, that you all are describing, that we could entertain that conversation, but only if we had that guarantee. So in this particular case, we have a different type of leverage, a different type of conversation with this property owner that, quite frankly, I've been having for years with them, so they are well aware of what the community's needs are, and they also know that nothing would be acceptable to us, but that if we are going to have a conversation about water.
And so speaking of the same area, the SCL has their facility there.
Yes.
Can anyone get space in there? For example, could these dentists actually
Yes.
be in that building?
Yes. So
it's not just SCL services in there.
No, the way that the MOB business works is that they have a network of doctors and people that they work with, and then they lease space to it. So it's somewhat of a glorified office building that has a niche, right? And that they're using their networks. So if these dentists or whatnot, I believe that they reserve the right for people in their network first, but if they had available space, they would certainly look to expand whatever it is. It's also about what kind of theme, that's probably the wrong word, are they trying to get out of their MOB space. So they don't want just a hodgepodge of just because you are an MD, you can be in this building, but maybe they're going after a certain type of medical practices that all relate to each other in some way.
MOB is medical office building.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I will say, I've heard good reviews of the doctors that are there now, so maybe they'll change or grow, so.
Great.
You may continue.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Again, similar to Newtown, streetscape enhances street and pedestrian experience while furthering defining connections within the plan area and improving safety. Streetscape design elements help create these friendly paths that encourage the users, improve walkability and connectivity. 3 landscape options for the potential design in this area along Indiana Street Corridor and Highway 72 have been shown on the plan, and they allow flexibility of the space referred to as verge between the back of curb to the sidewalk and the open space design elements appropriate for the street frontage of future developments in this area. The streetscape design, as shown on the slide, is consistent and complements existing developments along Highway 72 and Indiana Street, and potentially, again, they're on Highway 72 and Indiana Street in the Phase 1 area. In order to implement this potential streetscape design, the engineering standards would need to be evaluated along these corridors.
See, the trees are away from the street, so the chemicals don't hit them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was a highway, right? CDOT must have been involved with this one.
Boys.
Thank you. Next slide, please. During the community engagement process, members of the community felt disconnected from the rest of the city and would like to be identified as part of Arvada.
That's a great idea.
Several potential entry sign locations, both, again, it's with outside the parameters of Phase 1 and Phase 2, however identified on this map. The potential entry locations would be on Indiana Street near Highway 93, and then also on the north side of Indiana Corridor at the entrance into the city limits.
Ms. Jones?
I have to say this only because my wife has asked me 100 times, is it possible to put in the discussion, no, yeah, white lights, that's the one. But, so on the train overpass, some sort of welcome to Arvada, just because she's like, why can't you use that thing as a signage area? So again, I'm not looking for the answer tonight, but I have to put in, just in case she happens to be watching, I doubt it. Hopefully she hears this.
If we can get that approved by the railroad, we'll.
Yeah.
Ms. Smith?
I'm wondering if we can utilize some of our arts commission to craft a entry sign. If we're going to be putting one in here, utilizing some of the local artists for a design.
I think we probably want to keep our signage pretty consistent with entry signs, though, don't we? Or what's the policy? Do we have a policy?
Well, we want to be consistent with our branding and colors and so forth. However, I think there would be an opportunity to look at public art as part of this process. I don't know that we could identify that right now, but certainly we can look at that as a possibility somewhere.
Ms. Simpson?
Excellent opportunity for the Arts and Culture Commission. They've been working heavily on sculpture. I know for a fact there are graphic designers on that team who understand branding and could probably work with our team and provide some support in doing that.
Thank you.
Mr. Fiver?
There's already big signs out there, so you guys will have to figure out how to, because Candelas already has its branding out there, you know, in all those intersections. Could we add Line Road to some of that as well, to coming off Highway 93 as well? Because we do have the Partridge, I think, park sign there, if I remember right, but that's, right, that's all we have right there? Yeah. But maybe as well, I don't know if we can still spot off of Highway 93 right at there, because we are really the city at that point, but I would add that as well to this discussion.
And again, this would be implemented and considered with new developments at these locations. Some of these areas are still outside of the city limits too. Not outside, but it would have to be combined with any future redevelopment of those properties.
Mr. Pfeiffer, anything
I'm
else?
sorry.
That's good.
Next slide, please. The next steps are in the Speak Up Arvada survey. We will also be presenting giving a community opportunity to respond to these draft focus elements, framework, and recommendations as well. And then hoping to complete the final draft within the next few months and complete the plans at the end of 2022 and beginning of 2023. Next slide, please. And finally, are there any further questions or comments for consideration?
Final questions? Mr. Mormon?
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a general comment on both these plans, and it goes back to, I think we said at the beginning about sustainability be part of the plans. And so I think as these move forward, I'd like to see more of a focus, a sustainability lens that we're looking through at these as they're being developed. Thinking about water conservation, I know we talked a little about xeriscaping. I see that as some of the options, but it seems like there should be a higher priority placed on that. We've talked about transit multimodal, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate the conversation with Mr. Pfeiffer about tree canopy. I think that's a huge piece too that we need to be thinking about. Not only does it provide more shade, but it really helps lower our micro temperatures in the area and reduce our fire risk and things like that. So I think that needs to be a major piece of what we're thinking about as we move forward here. And just planning for increased flooding and fire risk and seeing that as part of the plans. The open asphalt, especially in the Newtown area and the parking lots we talked about, is how can we reduce that heat increase that we see from asphalt, reducing those temperatures there and with more shade. So those are some of the things that came to my mind just as a general statement of providing a little more sustainability focus as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Good
All right.
presentation, good information. I think it's great. I really like these sub-area plans because it lets us focus in on, some important areas in our community that we'll want to have sustainability and we'll want to have a bright future for down the road. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
You bet. Mr. Devitt, anything else you need from us tonight?
No, Mr. Mayor, thanks, and council, thank you for your comments and your feedback. This was a really engaging discussion, in my opinion.
Very good. We stand adjourned.